In 1960, a young woman walked into a church for confession and disappeared without a trace. For years, no one had answers, but someone had a secret. A holy man trusted by many, hiding something unholy. It took over 50 years for the truth to surface, but was justice truly served? McAllen, Texas, in 1960 was a town shaped by faith, family, and tradition. Nestled along the Rio Grande, it was a place where doors were left unlocked, and where the Catholic Church wasn't just a house of worship, it was the heart of the community. Sacred Heart Church stood at its center, a towering presence both physically and spiritually. The priests were revered figures, seen as moral guides, and the congregation followed their lead with unwavering trust. In a time before scandals and suspicion, questioning the church was unthinkable. It was in this world that Irene Garza had grown up, a world that valued faith, humility, and quiet perseverance. But Irene was anything but ordinary. She was a striking figure in McAllen, known for both her beauty and her intelligence. Born into a hardworking Mexican-American family, she understood the challenges of navigating a society where opportunities for people like her were limited. But Irene refused to be defined by limitations. She was the first in her family to attend college, earning a degree in education from Pan American College. She was a school teacher, a role model, and an inspiration to many young girls in her community. Beyond her academic and professional achievements, Irene had a presence that left an impression. So when she stepped out of her family home on the evening of April 16, 1960, dressed elegantly as she always was, no one thought twice. She told her parents she was going to Sacred Heart Church for confession, a routine preparation for Easter Sunday. The night was calm, the air still, and as Irene walked through the heavy church doors and disappeared inside, nothing seemed out of place. But in the hours that followed, McAllen's quiet world would be shattered, because this time, Irene would not be coming home. The night air was warm as Irene Garza stepped through the doors of Sacred Heart Church on April 16, 1960. The soft hum of prayers filled the dimly lit sanctuary as parishioners moved through the familiar ritual of Holy Week confession. This was a place of comfort, a sacred refuge. For Irene, a woman whose faith guided her every step, it was routine, a moment of reflection before Easter Sunday. Irene was last seen alive by members of the congregation. She waited in line, as she always did, patient and composed. Those who saw her recalled nothing unusual. She was dressed impeccably, carrying her black handbag. To those around her, she was simply another devoted parishioner, preparing for the holiest day of the year. But at some point that night, Irene Garza vanished. When morning came, and Irene had not returned home, her family's concern turned to fear. This was entirely unlike her. Irene was responsible, predictable, and deeply connected to her loved ones. She would not have stayed out without word. As the hours passed, her parents knew something was wrong. By Sunday, April 17, the police were involved, and McAllen's tight-knit community was gripped by unease. At first, there was hope. Perhaps she had fallen ill. Perhaps she was with a friend. But as hours turned to days, the weight of a darker possibility set in. The first chilling clues emerged. Investigators discovered Irene's purse and a single high-heeled shoe near the church. Soon after, her white lace veil, the delicate covering she had worn that night, was found abandoned on the side of the road. These were not the signs of a woman who had simply wandered off. A few days later, the case took an even more disturbing turn. A small portable slide viewer, a personal item later linked to Father John Feit, one of the priests at Sacred Heart Church, was discovered near the same area where Irene's belongings had been found. Still, without a body, The worst remained unspoken. The search continued, hope lingering in the air, though it grew thinner with each passing hour. Then, on April 21st, 1960, 5 days after Irene went missing, a horrifying discovery shattered any lingering doubt. Her body was found floating face down in an irrigation canal, just a few miles from town. Irene's lifeless body was pulled from the murky irrigation canal, her hands bound, her blouse torn. The questions that had once whispered through McAllen now roared. Irene Garza had been murdered, but by who and why? One thing was clear: whoever was responsible had gone to great lengths to ensure that she never made it home. McAllen was a town of faith, where the church stood at the heart of the community. Priests were trusted figures, men of God beyond suspicion. But as the investigation into Irene Garza's murder unfolded, the unthinkable happened. One name surfaced again and again: Father John Feit. At the time of Irene's disappearance, Father Feit was a 27-year-old visiting priest from Missouri assigned to Sacred Heart Church. Outwardly, he was devoted to his religious duties, charismatic, intelligent, and well-liked within the clergy. But beneath this surface, there were whispers. Just 3 weeks before Irene's murder, a woman named Maria America Guerra had reported a terrifying encounter at a nearby church. She claimed that a man, later identified as Feit, had attacked her, attempting to stuff a cloth into her mouth before she managed to escape. Although Feit was arrested for the assault, the case was quietly handled. Rather than removing him from service, the church simply reassigned him to Sacred Heart. Then came Irene. She walked into Sacred Heart Church for a simple confession, but Father John Feit noticed her right away. Witnesses later recalled how his eyes seemed to follow her, his interest more than just pastoral. This wasn't the first time either. On previous visits, Feit had pulled her aside from the confessional line, insisting they speak in private. But what did he really want? Irene trusted the church. She trusted Feit. But after that night, she was never seen alive again. Days later, her lifeless body was discovered in a canal, and soon evidence began to surface. Investigators found a small, portable slide viewer abandoned near the crime scene. It belonged to Father Feit, but that was just the beginning. A letter soon emerged, one that hinted at a chilling cover-up. Church officials had been discussing how best to handle the mounting suspicions against Feit, not out of a desire for justice, but to avoid scandal. The whispers within the church grew louder, but instead of aiding the investigation, the Catholic Church closed ranks to protect one of its own. Behind closed doors, church leaders convened in secret. Their goal was not to bring a murderer to justice, but to control the narrative. Documents later revealed backroom negotiations with local authorities, ensuring Feit would never stand trial. A quiet deal was struck with Hidalgo County prosecutors, allowing Feit to slip out of McAllen without facing a single charge. But the church didn't just shield him, they relocated him. First, Feit was sent to a remote Trappist monastery in Dubuque, Iowa, to live in isolation. Yet even that was temporary. The cover-up deepened as Feit was quietly transferred to the Servants of the Paraclete in New Mexico, an order infamous for harboring troubled priests. There, Feit wasn't just hidden, he thrived. He built a new life within the church, all while Irene Garza's family mourned, and justice remained just out of reach. For years, whispers of corruption and deception swirled around the case. Church officials didn't deny Feit's growing list of accusers. They ensured their silence. Men within the church knew the truth, but their loyalty lay with protecting the institution. In 1963, at the Trappist monastery, fellow monk Dale Ticheney heard a chilling confession. Feit admitted to murdering a young woman on Easter weekend, describing how he gagged her with a plastic bag and left her to die. Ticheney followed church protocol and reported the confession, but nothing happened. The church buried the truth deeper. Meanwhile, Feit's past was meticulously erased. His transfer to New Mexico placed him in an environment designed to rehabilitate priests accused of the gravest misconduct. There, he didn't just escape justice. He influenced policies that allowed abusive clergy to remain embedded in communities, perpetuating a cycle of abuse and silence. Decades passed. Evidence was buried, Witnesses grew old, and the world moved on. It seemed Irene Garza's story would fade into forgotten history. Until one day, long-held secrets began to unravel. The whispers became voices, and justice, after more than half a century, was finally within reach. The turning point in Irene Garza's case came decades later, driven by a renewed commitment from law enforcement and the courage of those who had long remained silent. For years, whispers of a cover-up surrounded Father John Feit, but without physical evidence or willing witnesses, the case remained frozen in time. However, in the early 2000s, the weight of buried secrets began to crack. Detective Rudy Jaramillo, a Texas Ranger, took a fresh look at the case. As he meticulously sifted through old reports, he found troubling inconsistencies, evidence that had been dismissed, testimonies ignored, and leads left unexplored. But the most damning revelations would not come from paper trails or forensic evidence. They would come from within the church itself. Dale Tasheni, a former monk, had carried a dark secret for decades. In 1963, a fellow clergyman had confided in him, describing how he had gagged a young woman with a plastic bag and left her to die. The confession haunted Tasheni, and when he saw Feit's name resurface in news reports, he knew the time had come to break his silence. His account was chilling, clear, detailed, and damning. Father Joseph O'Brien, another priest with long-held suspicions, confirmed what many had feared. Church officials had conspired to shield Feit from prosecution. O'Brien revealed that the church had engaged in internal discussions about Feit's guilt. Yet rather than turning him over to authorities, they orchestrated his transfer, first to a monastery and later to a new diocese, far from the scandal. The revelation shattered the long-standing silence, providing investigators with crucial testimony that linked Feit directly to Irene Garza's murder. As the revelations stacked up, the shield that had protected Feit for so long began to crack. The once powerful forces that had kept him safe were no longer able to hold back the tide of evidence. Law enforcement was closing in, and Feit's carefully constructed life, built on the foundation of deception, was about to come crumbling down. Something was coming, something inevitable, something that would finally expose the truth. With the pressure mounting and new witnesses stepping forward, the walls of protection around Feit finally collapsed. In 2016, more than 5 decades after Irene's death, authorities arrested the 83-year-old former priest in Arizona and extradited him to Texas. Father John Feit's trial in 2017 was marked by several critical moments that ultimately sealed his fate. The prosecution's key argument hinged on the testimonies of those who had been silenced for decades, and the physical evidence that tied Feit to the crime scene. Dale Tasheni's testimony was a pivotal moment. His recollection of Feit's chilling confession from 1963 provided the jury with first-hand insight into the priest's guilt. Equally powerful was the testimony of Father Joseph O'Brien, who described the internal discussions within the church to protect Feit. O'Brien's revelations painted a clear picture of institutional corruption and cover-up, underscoring the church's role in obstructing justice for over 5 decades. The prosecution also presented physical evidence, including the slide viewer found near Irene's body, which was conclusively linked to Feit. Combined with the timeline inconsistencies and witness accounts placing Feit with Irene Garza the night of her disappearance, the case against him grew stronger with each passing day in court. Feit's response during the trial was marked by stoic denial. He showed little emotion as the evidence mounted, maintaining his innocence despite the overwhelming testimonies and documentation. His demeanor remained cold and detached, even as the most damning evidence was presented. The trial revealed the depth of the cover-up and the extent to which the church had gone to protect one of its own. But in the end, justice prevailed. Feit was convicted and sentenced, bringing long-overdue closure to Irene Garza's family and exposing the truth behind one of the most chilling cover-ups in modern history. When the verdict was announced, the reaction from Irene Garza's family and the community was one of mixed relief and sorrow. After more than 50 years, justice had finally been served. But the pain of Irene's loss and the decades of cover-up could not be erased. The courtroom was filled with emotional outbursts, tears from family members who had waited a lifetime for this moment, and expressions of outrage from community members who were appalled by the church's long-standing protection of a murderer. Today, Irene Garza is remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, justice, and the power of those who refuse to let the truth be buried. A devout woman with a kind heart and ambitious spirit, she was a school teacher, a beauty queen, and a deeply faithful member of her community. Her life was stolen, but her story did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it became a rallying cry for those who demand accountability, even when institutions seek to silence them. Her case served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of institutional cover-ups. It highlighted how easily justice can be delayed when reputations are prioritized over lives. But perhaps the greatest lesson from Irene Garza's story is the perseverance of those who fought for her. It took over 5 decades, countless roadblocks, and the unwavering determination of her family, law enforcement, and witnesses willing to break their silence to finally bring the truth to light. How many other cases remain buried? How many voices are still unheard? Her story is a challenge to all of us, to speak up, to push forward, and to never accept silence as justice. Because if justice can be found after 50 years, then no case is truly cold, only waiting for the right people to demand the truth. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to Darkly Wired and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our daily deep dives into the most chilling true crime cases. If you want to reach out, follow me on any major social media platform. Just look for @DarklyWired and send me a DM. One more thing, just know that I truly appreciate your support. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay wired. See ya.